Welcome to this week's edition of Top 10 in 10, brought to you by The Watch Post. Each week, we cover 10 important stories unfolding around us in these last days in 10 minutes or less. I'm your host, the Watchwoman at her post, also known as The Lookout. This is episode 104 for the week ending Friday, April 11th, and we've got a great collection of news stories to share with you this time. End-time signs are converging on multiple levels right now, and for those of us watching for the return of the Lord, well, it's a fascinating time to be alive. So here we go with the countdown. Story number 10. The digital control system is taking shape, one rule at a time. Discussions have been growing lately around dormant account rules now extending into cryptocurrency, as digital assets are brought under the same frameworks long used for traditional finance. For decades, inactive accounts have been transferred to state treasuries after years of no activity. Now, as crypto enters the mainstream, those same principles are beginning to apply in the digital space. It's being treated as a financial asset, like a bank account or a stock. Policies enacted late last year are now moving into the implementation phase, meaning financial platforms are beginning to comply, and the topic is gaining traction across social media. As money becomes fully digital, the systems around it become more structured, more visible, and more responsive to oversight. Some view this as routine regulation catching up with technology, but to others, it's one more small step toward implementation of the Antichrist system that will soon fully control the ability to buy or sell. Nonconformity with that system won't be an option. Number 9. Signs in the U.S. economy shaping up for disaster. New economic data released this week confirms the U.S. economy is headed down a dangerous fiscal path. The unemployment rate has climbed to 4.5%, while inflation remains stubbornly above the 2% target, and consumers are paying at least 3% more than last year for goods and services, excluding food. The labor market is experiencing a low-hire, low-fire equilibrium, where jobs are stagnant. Conflict in the Middle East has driven oil price volatility, with the Federal Reserve warning that energy shocks could push U.S. inflation to 2.75% or more for the year. Goldman Sachs has raised its U.S. recession probability. Oxford Economics warns that if oil reaches $140 a barrel, the Eurozone, UK, and Japan could enter contraction, and the U.S. faces an economic standstill. The instability brings to mind the warning in Revelation 6 about 1 quart of wheat for a day's wages. As inflation continues to rise, many are worried about how they'll feed their families. Number 8. Nations in peril over Hormuz closing, the largest supply disruption in history. Closure of the narrow passage that carries 20% of the world's daily crude oil and liquefied natural gas has triggered what the International Energy Agency is calling the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Nations in the Gulf are in crisis mode. Food supply chains in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar have been severed. Those nations import over 80% of their caloric intake through the Strait of Hormuz. By mid-March, 70% of food imports to Gulf states had been disrupted. Consumer prices spiked 40 to 120% in some areas. Drone attacks hit Qatar energy infrastructure, which its owner warned could take up to 5 years to fully repair. So systems are strained all around the globe. For those of us watching closely, it raises serious concerns about the kind of system those pressures will ultimately give rise to. Number 7. Plagues and pestilence burden multiple countries. The convergence of famine, pestilence, and war in Congo harkens images of the 4 horsemen beginning their gallop. The African country is grappling with one of the worst cholera outbreaks in a decade. It's been compounded by the escalation of the M23 armed group, which seized control of key gold and rare earth mining sites, displacing millions of people. International aid has been slashed, leaving the health system in a state of total collapse. Global health officials recently warned that cholera response supplies bound for African nations were also being delayed because of disruptions linked to Middle East conflict logistics. The World Health Organization says this could have dramatic consequences, especially heading into rainy seasons where outbreaks accelerate. Meanwhile, the government of Bangladesh has confirmed that the nation is facing its most severe measles outbreak in a decade, with more than 6,400 children across 56 districts infected and at least 113 suspected deaths, the majority among infants and toddlers. U.S. measles cases are also on the rise, already surpassing 1,000 in 2026, which is a stark public health warning in the developed world as well. And health officials released data this week showing a record 220-case surge of flea-borne typhus in Los Angeles County. Nearly 90% of patients required hospitalization. Clusters struck Central LA, Santa Monica, and Willowbrook. Number 6. Christian persecution now at historic levels. Open Doors' 2026 World Watch List, the most comprehensive annual audit of global Christian persecution, reports that more than 388 million Christians now live in countries where they face high levels of persecution or discrimination. That's 1 in 7 Christians worldwide. The total rose by 8 million people from the previous year. Syria, now among the top 10 most dangerous countries, moved from number 18 up to number 6. After the fall of Assad's regime in December 2024, jihadist-linked leadership introduced Islamic jurisprudence as the basis for transitional law. Open Doors confirmed at least 27 deaths of believers in Syria in their most recent reporting cycle, compared to 0 the year before. Sub-Saharan Africa is the global epicenter of violence against Christians. 3 nations hold a maximum persecution score: Sudan, Nigeria, and Mali. In Sudan, ranked 4, ongoing civil war has produced massacres of Christian communities in Darfur and South Kordofan. The violence score in sub-Saharan Africa has risen from 49% to 88% of the total category score over the past decade. Speaking of Nigeria, bloody attacks during Holy Week and Easter Sunday claimed dozens of lives there when armed men stormed churches in Kaduna State on April 5, killing worshippers mid-service. Jesus warned us we'd be hated for his name's sake. The closer we get to the 7-year tribulation, the worse this will become. Number 5. Anti-Semitism on the rise in the wake of geopolitical strife. A watchdog group called the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement has confirmed a 34% increase in anti-Semitic incidents worldwide. High-profile attacks have occurred at synagogues and Jewish institutions in Liège, Belgium, Rotterdam, Netherlands, and London, where several ambulances belonging to a Jewish emergency service were set on fire. Sources link the increased activity to anti-Israeli sentiment stemming from recent military actions against Iran. In related news, Israeli authorities limited access to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Holy Week, which lead to international debates over religious freedom and selective enforcement. In an effort to prevent anti-Semitic discord, Catholic and Protestant leaders issued formal warnings against using Holy Week liturgies to promote collective blame against Jewish people. Some denominations, such as the United Methodists, proactively revised Bible reading recommendations for Easter to emphasize the Jewish context of Jesus' life and combat prejudice. Many pastors believe that anti-Semitic behavior is one of the most obvious signs that we're living in the last days. They point to scriptures like Zechariah 12:2, which says that God will make Jerusalem a cup that sends surrounding peoples reeling, and that when all the nations of earth are gathered against her, he will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. Number 4. Government disclosure and doctrines of demons. Aliens and UFOs are no longer fringe territory. President Trump signed a formal directive ordering all relevant federal agencies to release their classified files by next month. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed that the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office carries a caseload of more than 2,000 unexplained reports dating back to 1945, submitted by military personnel, pilots, and government employees. And it's not just America. Governments in Japan, France, Brazil, and Canada all have formal investigative programs. Harvard professor Avi Loeb returned to L.A. Marzulli's YouTube channel this week to discuss 3-Eye Atlas again, bringing up the possibility that the recent uptick in meteorites could have something to do with the object's recent passing, or it could be a Trojan horse.
What is your gut, telling you? And you've been following this thing for months, and you've been all over all media talking about it. And you also had a warning that what if it's like a Trojan horse type event?
Yeah, I'm definitely concerned about that possibility. There is no threat to Earth because it's moving out, except if it releases some probes that are visiting us.
Congressman Tim Burchett remained in the social media cycle for the second week in a row, making an appearance on The Michael Knowles Show to talk about what the government knows about UFOs. For those of us anchored in scripture, the question is not whether something otherworldly is operating in the skies. We're well versed on the spiritual forces of evil in the heavens. The greater concern is what narrative will be handed to the world when the files open. Jesus warned us multiple times not to be deceived when the great delusion and subsequent falling away take place at the end of days. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Number 3. A thwarted ceasefire. Peace and safety, then sudden destruction. Now we turn to Iran for an update on the war. After 40 days of conflict, the U.S. and Iran agreed to a temporary ceasefire so peace talks could resume. Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shahbaz Sharif, helped broker the breakthrough. Trump credited China with helping push Iran to the negotiating table. But within hours of the announcement, Israel launched what it described as its largest strikes in Lebanon since the conflict began. President Trump said Iran knew Israel was not part of the ceasefire deal, but Iran disputed that point and effectively reclosed the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran's foreign minister presented a 10-point negotiation framework that includes lifting sanctions, a war loss fund, possible U.S. troop withdrawal from the Gulf, and recognition of Iran's right to enrich uranium. The White House confirmed the U.S. literally threw it in the garbage. Talks occurred in Islamabad, Pakistan on Friday, but quickly broke down when Iran refused to negotiate their terms.
What end times watchmen see in this situation is the ancient land of Persia drawing other nations into the dispute it has with Israel. We see Israel becoming more isolated with the rise of anti-Semitism. All of this could easily give rise to the hook in the jaws scenario, exactly as prophets foretold in Ezekiel 38 and other scriptures. The potential for a global economic collapse triggered by a Middle Eastern conflict is exactly what the prophetic scriptures warn of, a world on the brink, waiting for a leader to solve the unsolvable. And finally, for our number 1 story, new evidence supports authenticity of the Shroud of Turin. Researchers studying the famous shroud, thought to be the burial cloth of Jesus, have completed analysis of the blood found on the fabric, and they've concluded it to be type AB, one of the rarest classifications. But the evidence doesn't stop there. Microscopic pollen grains embedded in the fibers have been traced to plants native to the Mediterranean region, species that would have been present during the time and place traditionally associated with the crucifixion. Perhaps most intriguing of all is the new theory surrounding the how the image itself was formed on the cloth. We know it's not paint, not dye, not the result of any known artistic process. Researchers now suggest it was formed by a brief, intense burst of energy, an event that affected only the outermost fibers of the linen, leaving behind the detailed three-dimensional image that science has yet to reproduce.
While this story might not be prophetic in nature, it's definitely relevant in days like these, when the world at large has placed all things about God and creation under scrutiny, many choosing to instead believe we were created by extraterrestrials.
That's it for this week's edition of the Top 10 in 10. Leave your thoughts about this week's stories in the comments section below. Join us again next time for another update on news in the prophetic landscape. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and click the bell so you don't miss a beat. Until next time, stay in the Word, keep your eyes on Jesus, and pray continuously. May God bless and keep you all. Watchwoman signing out.